Hey everyone, how's it going? So today what I want to talk about is laying out an actual stair stringer. So in the last lesson we covered doing the math for a stair stringer and figuring out what our rise and run was supposed to be. So pretty much all we did in the last lesson was we took a complete total rise, which is the distance that we have to overcome from floor to floor, and we broke that down into equal segments. Once we've broken it down into equal segments, we then had a riser height. And if you remember, once we lay this out in a grid format, basically all we were doing is creating little triangles. So let's not forget that. Let's try to keep it kind of simple and just remember we just need to create little triangles so that we can make everything manageable. So that's what we're trying to do. So to do this, we're going to use these two items right here. So I have your basic framing square, and I also have what we call square buttons. Some people might actually refer to these as stair gauges. So these basically have a little twist screw on it right there that clamps down onto your framing square. Now for this example, what I'm going to do is for my rise and my run, I'm going to use 7.5 inches for my rise, and I'm going to use 10 inches for my run. So first thing I want to do is I want to locate my square buttons on those numbers that my math has told me what my rise and my run need to be. So that's the first thing we're going to do. Now on the framing square, this acts as a tape measure. And one thing that you want to do is ensure that your button is actually going on the correct measurement. But what I mean by that is make sure that from the edge of your square to the beginning of your button is the measurement that you want. So right now I have that at 7.5 inches. So you can see my button is on the outgoing side of 7.5. You do not want to slide and put the outgoing side of your button on 7.5. So you want to locate your button so that from the beginning of your square to your button, you have the full measurement of what you are after. And then the other one, I'll place it 10. And also, as you can see, I've also have placed the buttons on the same edge of the square. So I don't want to place a button on the outside and one on the inside. That'll completely change our angles and it will not work. So buttons, make sure you have correct measurements and the buttons are located on the same side of the square. So as you can see, all we've done, we've created a rise and a run. And if I hold that there, if I would be able to connect these two buttons like that, I have done nothing more than make a triangle. So, now that we have that, let's get started. So this side, because this is 7.5, this will represent our riser, this will represent our tread. And the first thing I want to do is locate my square along the edge of my 2x12. And again, buttons are on the same side of the square, but they are also on the same side of my lumber. So I do not want to do something like this. That will completely change things, as you can see. So what I want to do is place my framing square here, and I'm simply going to trace my square and make a triangle. Now, me personally, what I will do is I will come to what I know is my riser, and I want to place a number there. So that is number 1. Now I'm going to slide my square down along the edge of the board. And right here where this tread material left off and leaves the edge of my board, I'm going to line up my next riser. And again, I'm going to trace my square. This is riser number 2. And I will do one more. So again, I'm just repeating the steps. Right where the tread leaves off, I create the next riser. And here is riser number 3. Couple reasons I like to number them like that. Number 1, that helps me keep track as I'm laying out how many risers I have. Once I get to the desired number of risers that I need from my math, then I know I've laid out far enough. Another reason is, as you're looking at this, you have that sawtooth type of design. If you notice, I kind of keep the number close to the line that is representing my risers. So that actually helps me kind of get a visual of what is my risers and what are my treads. Okay, so now we have our desired number of risers. Our next thing to do is to actually create the last cut lines so that we have our stringers. So when we go to cut this, we're going to be cutting out our little triangles here so that we can actually keep this portion here, which is our stair stringer, or the structural portion that's going to support our stairs. So what I need to do, if you can imagine this 2x4 right here, if this is my wall, I actually need to create a line that is parallel to it so that I can come into this wall straight and be able to connect this stringer. So in order to do that, I can bring my square back up the same way that I had it. I'm lining right back up with my lines. Now what I'm going to do is I'm not going to flip the square. I'm not going to turn it around or anything. I'm just simply going to take it and go across the board, and I will line that back up. And I'm just going to continue this riser line straight down through my board. Now I know I don't have this perfectly lined up here for this example, but as you can see, if this was perfectly plumb and so forth, this would come right into that. So that'll give us our final plumb cut at the top of our stringer. And the last thing we need to do is we're going to deal with this area down here. So this riser is rising up to my next floor, to where I want to go. And this riser is the first step I am taking onto my staircase from the floor or the level where I am. So this line right here is actually representing my floor. What I need to do is continue this through so that my stringer will actually sit on my floor. So again, I'm going to take my square, I want to line it up exactly how it was, and I am simply going to bring it across the board, and I'll just slide it along until I line back up, and I'll continue this line through. Now what I've done is I have created a line that is right in plane with where my floor is. So this will, when I cut this, this will actually sit on my floor. So we have one final step to do here, and that is still down here. The problem we have is once we cut this out, we're going to be removing these little triangles. And the reason we were removing these is because we're going to be applying something on top of them so that we can actually place our foot. So when this is said and done, our foot's going to come and sit right down on top of that tread material. So this would actually be your tread. The problem is when I add a tread here, say this is 1 inch thick, I've now created a distance from here to here that is no longer 7.5. Right now this will be 6.5. But I also need a tread up here because I need to be able to place my foot there as I project upward. That'll actually increase this back to 7.5 and keep everything right in line. I am not going to add any tread material to my floor. My stringer is just going to sit directly on my floor. So once I add this tread material here, I've actually created something. Again, if this is 1 inch thick, I've added to it. Now I am at 8.5 rather than 7.5. What I want to actually do is this last tread mark, or the mark that represents my floor, I actually want to raise it up into my stringer. And I need to raise it, the thickness of the material I am putting here for a tread. So in this case, what I'm talking about is an inch. I can simply use my square and a tape measure on it, and I'll put a mark at 1 inch. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to line my square back up the way I had it for that final line, and I'm going to just slide it up the board until I hit that 1 inch mark, and then I will draw that line. So now what I've done is I've created a new cut line. This is where you will actually cut. And what that does is that brings this riser down, the thickness of this, so that when we add this tread material to place our foot on, we are actually keeping our risers all the same. So that is your last step. So there we have it. There is a 3-rise stringer. This is ready to cut out. That'd be ready to go. What I've done here is I've wrote these steps down for you so that you can keep these in mind. So our first step is we're going to place our square on the board with the buttons along the edge of the board, and we're simply going to trace out our square. Step number 2, we're going to slide the square down along the edge of the board. We're going to trace it once again. Step 3, we're going to repeat the same process of step 1 and 2 until we have reached the correct number of risers. Step number 4, we're going to use our square, and we're going to continue this first riser down through our stringer. Step number 5, using the square, continue the last tread mark back down through your riser. So right now, this last tread mark is representing your floor. You're simply going to use your square to bring that back through your stringer. And step number 6, you need to raise that last tread mark up the thickness of your first tread. So that is right here. Whatever material we are placing here, we're going to reduce that thickness, and then we will create a new line here. So there is your stair stringer in 6 simple steps. I hope this helps.